And now, with sound investing, here's Paul Merriman.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Valerie, for the kind words. I got to tell you, I am always excited when I have a chance to speak to people who, well, first can use the information potentially for themselves, because if I can even motivate you to think deeply about one of the 12 suggestions that I have here today, I think just one of them would be a life changer for most investors, particularly young investors, and the younger, the better. But the other thing today is I'm talking to people that are talking to other people. And from my viewpoint, our commitment as a foundation is, in fact, focused on helping people of all ages, from the newborn child. I've got a brand new um, granddaughter about to be born any minute now. And I've got a plan from the day she is alive. There'll be a plan in place for her that will, with just a few dollars, and even just $1 a day is all it takes, to do something for her, so that she has an honest shot, even if she's not a big wage earner in her life, to be okay in retirement. So I start from birth, I go to death. By the way, there's responsibilities at death as well, because all of a sudden, whatever mess we make with our lives, or good things we make with our lives, when we're no longer here, all of that goes to work someplace else. And so we work hard. And I might make one comment about Valerie's suggestions about our work. While I do underwrite, our foundation does, the course at Western Washington University. I don't know how much you know about college professors, but the idea that I would come in and tell them what to teach, no way. I write checks, and and they put the curriculum together. But there were things I wanted in the curriculum, and things that I would not continue writing the checks if we were teaching young people how to make money buying individual stocks. I didn't want any part of that. I wanted to teach the things that we know have worked for virtually everyone who did them over a long period of time. And I wanted to be like a lotto, and a few win and most lose. I wanted to be something literally everybody can participate in those winnings. And when we're talking about our kids, we are talking about a reality that they spend, I figure, some 16,000 hours in class and studying by the time they get out of college, K through 12, and then on for another 4 or 5 years. And how much of that time is being spent on this topic of, well, financial literacy or personal finance, or simply are they going to know what to do with the few extra dollars they have that give them an opportunity to live a reasonable retirement? And the fact is that since we don't prepare those people, they then are not ready in many cases to do the right thing from day one in saving for their retirement. And look, we look back to 1964. If you look at tables that show what has done to the income that we receive in relationship to the inflation that's happened over the last 50 or 100 years, but since 1964, the return or the income that we are receiving from our work is about the same as the inflation has been. There has not been any real growth of income, but it's simply been barely keeping up with inflation. And now, those of us who had the advantage of pensions, those of us who didn't have to compete with people overseas who are willing to work for a lot less than we are, and then being left and told that we're on our own, that they're not going to take care of the money management for us, but we as people who have not been trained to manage money are asked to be the superintendents of money management. And that just, for most people, doesn't cut it if they haven't been educated. The beauty is investing has never been easier. Never. It is more efficient today than it has ever been. That's the good news. The bad news is there's never been so much bad advice. And unfortunately, many of our young people aren't going to know the difference between good advice and bad advice. That's where I think we come in. And it starts with the reality that to know everything about investing is virtually impossible. But there is this circle, this imaginary circle within which everything that's ever happened, every day in the market, every depression, every recession, the good times, the bads, the elections and the non-elections, whatever the problems have been, and how they impacted what happened to the market, they're all inside of this circle. And inside there are 5 pieces of pie. The one is what you know, you know. And our job as teachers is to expand that piece of pie as best we can. That I think is what we perceive to be our primary objective. But there's another piece of pie that represents what you know you don't know. And if we think about it, the thing we really want to know is about the future. Can't know about the future. Nobody knows about the future. I don't care how smart you are about the past. You cannot know the future, but it is part of the process. But then there's another piece that represents what you don't know. You don't know. And this is an interesting situation because the reality, and this is an important piece of pie for investors. The reality is that all of us are limited in our knowledge, and the kind of thing that will cause bad times to happen and surprises on the downside, bear markets and all the money that people lose during a bear market, those typically come from things that people were not expecting. We might today think, well, we weren't expecting the pandemic, and we weren't expecting a war in Ukraine. And Greenspan back in 2008 even said he was surprised at what happened in the housing industry and the collapse of the housing prices. He didn't perceive that to be a risk. Well, the one thing you can do to protect against the things you don't know is to have a lot of diversification. Because anytime you start zeroing in and doing a whole bunch of one thing, you take the risk that something you don't know is going to come along and bite you. Then there's a piece that represents what you know, but you are wrong. And that's called a myth. I mean, that's what I think of it in terms of people will say things like, stocks are just a gamble, investing in the market. You might as well go to Las Vegas. It's just a racket. There's a bunch of people making money off of me, and I'm not going to make any money. Well, the fact is that is absolutely a myth. And yet I understand why people feel like that, because other people they might know have in fact done poorly in their investments. But more than likely, and I really mean in probably 99% of the cases, if we could look at them individually, it will turn out that they were doing things that lots of people would say were inappropriate, taking too much risk for too little return, if sometimes there's no return, possibly. And then this is the one that frustrates me most. I understand the myths. I understand that you can't know stuff and that there's stuff that will happen that you weren't prepared for. But once you know stuff and you don't do anything about it, that is the piece of pie that I don't like. And I don't know that as teachers, how much responsibility we have in that regard. But from my viewpoint, our job is to broaden them what they know and teach them the things that are important. And by the way, if you try to teach them too much, they get confused. There are millions of things they could know. But what if we could just boil it down to a few things that are really driving the bus, that are really represent maybe even 99% of how much money you will make can be seen in as little as 12 different decisions. And then I don't know how we motivate them, but I think the best shot we got is to educate them. Because if they're going to protect themselves from the crooks and the con men, if they get an education, that is the best defense I know against bad information. So there we go. We're going to focus as teachers on making them know more and hopefully motivating them to move forward. Warren Buffett says it. He says, to be a success, you only have to do a very few things right in your life, so long as you don't do too many things wrong. So when I focus in on these 12 right things to do, which, by the way, there's not one of them that Warren Buffett would disagree with, but we focus on that, but we can't ignore the things that are wrong. So I spend a good part of my teaching when I have the time to teach or write an article or write a book about the bad things. I've got one book, it's free. It's called Get Smart or Get Screwed, How to Select the Best and Get the Most Out of Your Financial Advisor. In that book, there are 80 things I don't like about stockbrokers, okay? Or let me say it another way. There are 80 things I don't like about depending on people who are commission-based to give you advice. So there's lots of bad things you could know about, but those few things that we want you to get right, they're in the book. You all have the book. You can get it as a PDF download. Yeah, you can go buy it for $18 or $19 at Amazon, but it's the same stuff that's in the free PDF. And there's also a audio book that we've created. Both are free. And my thought is this: if you could just find one chapter or one part of one chapter, they are short chapters, that you think would help the children, the students, then you can forward the book to them, and maybe, just maybe, not only will they read the rest of the book, but maybe their parents will read the book too. Now, I love numbers. As I was mentioning to Valerie earlier, before we got started, math doesn't lie. I mean, I'm in a business of what they call blue sky stories, things that there's not necessarily any substance to it. And at the end of the day, what is not blue sky is the money you get paid in your retirement from the investments you make and the money you leave to others. And what I want our young people to know is that little tiny changes in what they're doing can mean millions of dollars. Now, when you're teaching, you can use different numbers than I use. I happen to use $6,000 as the investment for 40 years here. $6,000 a year for 40 years or $240,000. If you don't think your students are going to know how to deal with that much, you could do it with $600. You could do it with any amount you want. But here's what I want them to see: that to begin with, a very reasonable long-term return for investing is about 8% a year. And I'm talking about I can't say safe investing, but I can tell you that if you do it in this, what I call a conservative, safe way, the worst 40-year return since 1928 has been about a 9% compound rate of return in the equity part of the portfolio, the stock part of the portfolio. Now, when you get older, you're going to have some bonds in your portfolio. So you're not going to get stock market returns, but over a lifetime, a conservative, very conservative strategy gives them a very good opportunity for an 8% compound rate of return during that 40-year period. And then we retire. And for 30 years, in this assumption, that this math we're doing here, I'm assuming a 6% rate of return in your investments because you're going to take less risk. We still want you to take some risk, but very little. And you're going to pay yourself 4% a year to live on. A lot of academics say that is an amount you can use for planning how much you take out. So if you retire with $100,000, you get to take out 4,000 out of that 100,000 to live on. Now, if you put away this $6,000 a year over the 40 years, and you get the 8% compound rate of return. And we know it's not going to be constant 8%, but just for the sake of discussion, let's assume it is for the math of it. What would it be worth at age 65, putting away that $6,000 or $500 a month? Would be worth about $1.7 million. And then you start living on it. You start taking out that 4% a year. Over 30 years, they would take out $2.6 million. And then they die. And they leave something to the people, either their heirs, the children, or to charities, more than likely. And in this particular case, if you started with that $1.7 million and you took out $2.8 million, you'd still have $2.6 million left. So the total return in terms of the math on your $240,000 is the combination of the $2.8 million and the $2.6 million, which is $5.457 million. Now, I think that's a whale of a return. And the way to get there, that simple 8% and 6% return, is to invest in a product that requires to make the investor make that decision one time and never do another thing the rest of their life, literally. And we'll talk about it in just a second. I'm sure you all know what it is, but I'm still going to talk about it for a minute. But here is the magic. And it's the magic of compounding that is in some ways pretty hard to believe. I mean, if I ask high school kids about inflation, if they get the idea of what it is, I say, look, I paid 5 cents a piece for a piece of bubble gum. Well, no, I'm sorry. When I started out, it was a penny a piece. And then I'll ask what they pay for bubble gum. And of course, they're paying maybe 10 cents, maybe 20 cents, depends how it's packaged and what kind of a card comes inside. But that inflation has forced the price of bubblegum up. And then I asked them, if you did that for 2,000 years, how much do you think inflation at 3% a year would make that one piece of bubblegum worth? And then we asked for, and then we started, to 1,000, and I push them to 10,000, and we eventually get to $1 million. It's $2.3 trillion billion. It's 2-3 followed by, I think it's 23 or 21 or 23 zeros. The impact of inflation over long periods of time. And by the way, when you're a 20-year-old, 21-year-old kid just starting to invest, and you're looking out over investing for probably 70 years, you're talking about the greatest asset you have. And that is the ability, compared to me at age 79, the ability to have this money compound for decades. And I want them to see, if they could just add an extra 0.5%, if there's any way they could do something, I don't want it to be foolish, I don't want it to be risky, I just want it to be easy that they could do and understand that instead of 8, they get 8.5. Instead of 6, they get 6.5. And what's going to happen? They're going to end up with more money at retirement. Instead of 1.7 million, they're going to end up with about 1.9. Now, that does not seem all that big a deal, all that much difference. except then it's going to start continuing to grow a little bit because you're taking money out. But instead of taking out 2.6, you're going to take out you're going to take out 3.2 in income in retirement. And then you're going to leave 3.7 million to others. And when you add together the 3.7 and the 3.2, it's almost $7 million. It is about $1.5 million more. And by the way, what we know, now I don't know how many of your kids are going to go on or not go on to college, but we know from studies that people who are 25 and have got a college degree, and of course, but obviously, particularly if they're in the STEM fields, this gets easier. But the average earnings come close to 60 some $1,000. Now, when I was their age and I came out of college, my starting wage was $434 a month. And I got along on it. Well, there's the impact of inflation. I mean, instead of having $5,000 income, people are going to have a whale of a lot more. So I don't think it's outrageous to use the $6,000 example, but you can easily build your own tables. I'm just saying this. If we can teach them the simple things that could make that number go up by a half or a percent or 1.5% or 2%, and believe it or not, we can show easily ways that there's a 3% difference in what you could have had and were likely to have or what you should have had because of, by the way, it is about their knowledge and their actions. That those are two things that are important, because you could know everything you needed to know, but if you don't act the way you know you should act, and this is not a holier than thou statement I'm making, as Valerie knows, because she's watched some of my presentations, she knows my weakness is not making mistakes as an investor particularly, we all do, but my mistake is just in eating. I'm celebrating my birthday week. Why would I celebrate for a week? Well, one is my wife has her birthday in the same week, but the other reason is I love to eat. And that love of eating, which I know is not in my best interest, has been greater than my intelligence about how to eat. And I'm not the only one in the world to have this problem, but it's the same with investing. The experts will say the worst enemy of the investor is themselves. So I'm going to try to show you some ways. Now this is so easy. This is obvious. If I wanted to make somebody an extra $1 million, and that's what I'm looking for on every one of these, is an extra $1 million because you did it. And if I make this decision, spend versus save, of course that's $1 million decision. Lots of people spend everything they make. Well, you can say that that's because they can't afford to save. But there are people in other societies that make less than the people who can't save, who do save because it's part of the tradition. It's what they believe in. Now, when I spent time in Mexico, I saw people who believed to such a degree about their religion that they'd go for a walk and they'd be beating themselves and causing themselves to be bloody because they believed in it. And I know we have people, we'd love to be there and help some young person who's going through the decision, should I smoke or should I not smoke? Well, I know what most of us would say. Even if we were smokers, we'd probably say, do not smoke. Well, it's the same thing here. And we were talking before we got started about this whole process of getting people to save. Like it's asking people to give up something that is so dear to them. Well, what we need to impress on these young people is that saving is all about spending. Saving is about spending later. And if you want to have a life that looks anything like the good stuff you build when you're a worker bee, believe me, you need to save to be able to do that. Unless you can win the lottery, or unless you marry a really rich person, or unless you come from you just have the luck to be married into the right family. That's luck. Most of the success of people in life, in many cases, it's about luck. So our job is to show them, one, how much they need to save and where they need to save. And I think to convince them that, in fact, saving is really about spending. And I think they need to understand, let's take it down a level about this $1 million payoff. All it takes is $100 a month. Okay. Now, obviously, to a kid in high school, that's a lot of money. But we know soon after today, it's $100 a month is certainly not a lot of money once you get going, once you get your feet on the ground and you're doing something that's productive. And let's say that you did that, $100 a month, and that you earned 8% over 40 years. That's $311,000 at age, call it 65. Then they get a 6% return like we talked about with 4% distributions for 30 years. That's $496,000. Then we pass on to others, $540,000. You add the $496 and the $540, and there's how you get $1 million. Now you can say, well, I didn't get to enjoy it at all. Well, no, it's easy. The day before you die, you spend it all. I mean, it's going to be one whale of a day we will never forget, even though it's the last day. But you got the idea. That $1 million is there. People think that it's impossible. No, it is not impossible. And the sooner we get started, like I mentioned earlier with my new granddaughter, is I'm getting her started on day one. Look, $1 a day from birth to age 70. Now I used to use 65, but people aren't going to retire at 65 who are being born today. They're likely going to be working until they're 70. Now, if they learn how to invest and save as well, obviously, they could retire maybe a lot sooner. But if they did put away $1 a day for 70 years at 10%, that's the stock market return, okay? That's what the S&P 500 gets, the average, if you will, of the 500 largest U.S. corporations. It grows to 2.9 million. Now, you want to talk about the importance of investing early? If you just waited 10 years and you started at age 10 instead of at birth, and did $1 a day, it's 1.1 million. That's $1.8 million difference because of the first 10 years of 365. $3,650 became a difference at age 70 of 1.1. I'm sorry, of an additional $1.8 million. This is just math. No projections, no promises. If you wait until they're 20, it's 425,000. Now, we can also, by the way, look at the two kids. One is 25 and one is 30. Young people, I'm sorry, 25 and 30. One invests, well, in fact, they both invest $6,000 a year, but one starts 5 years earlier. And so during that 5-year period, they put away the money and it grows at 8%. To be worth about $35,000. So there you are. Let's say you're the one that starts 5 years earlier, and your friend is just getting started and putting the money away. You now have $35,000. They have nothing, but they're about to have something. So that $35,000, set it aside. When I say set it aside, I'm just saying that pretend you set it aside and see what it does, because that other person did not have that 35,000. And it turns out that's worth about $1.9 million at age 65 with, or let's see, excuse me. This is 65 and in retirement. They end up with extra distributions and what they leave to others of $1.9 million. If I confused you, I hope you'll watch it again or read the book. Okay, here's number 3. And by the way, did I make a case for starting earlier for an extra $1 million? I hope so. Stocks versus bonds. This is the slam dunk of the century. If we look at history, and that's all we have, this information, here's what we know. Bonds are safe one day at a time, mostly safe, not perfectly safe, but mostly safe. They don't go up and down very much over short periods of time. Stocks go up and down a lot. I mean, they might go up and down 2-3% in a day, And typically bonds are going to go up small fractions of a percent under the worst of conditions in a day. So what do we know? We know if we look back to 1928, go through the Depression, go through all of the bad times and the good times and the wars and all that stuff, bonds on average made about 5% and stocks made about 10. Now, there are a whole bunch of different kinds of stocks and there are a bunch of different kinds of bonds. We're just looking at the average. And what we know is when you make 5 or you make 10, that is 10. The difference is 10 half a percent. Remember, we are looking for a 0.5%. Well, to go from 5 to 10 is 10 of those, which in theory suggests that if you could make 10 instead of 5, that you would make an extra $10 million over your life. And I know you're not buying that, but it's true. Again, it is nothing but math. You have to look at the pieces because if you retire, for example, putting away money at $6,000 a year from 25 to 65, you have about a $2.6 million retirement at the 10%. You have $725,000 at the 5%, and now we take distributions, and the distributions are $10 million approximately with the equities and 1.1 with the bonds. And then we die and we leave money to others. In the one case, we leave 14.3 million. In the other case, you leave about $1 million. Now, there is nothing wrong if you want to live on less and have a feeling of complete safety at all times. The bonds are there for people to do that. But it wasn't a $10 million difference. It was more than 10 million. It was about $24 million. Here's the fork in the road young people come to. Huge, huge difference. Everything in one stock, find that great stock, find the next. What are we talking? We're talking Tesla. We're talking Amazon. We're talking what? Facebook, something that's going to go to the moon. Oh, cryptocurrency. There's one. Put your money in cryptocurrency. Well, I can tell you,